You think gravity is pulling you down toward the ground right now. You believe there's an invisible force reaching out from the center of the earth, grabbing onto your body and dragging you downward. This seems obvious, undeniable, confirmed by every moment of your physical experience. But you're completely wrong. Gravity doesn't pull you anywhere. There is no force pulling you down. The sensation you interpret as being pulled toward Earth is actually something far stranger and more mind-bending than any simple force could ever be. What you call gravity isn't a force at all. It's the curvature of space and time itself. And understanding this changes everything about what it means to exist in this universe. You've been taught that gravity is one of the fundamental forces of nature, like electromagnetism or the nuclear forces. Newton described it as a mysterious action at distance force that somehow reaches across empty space to pull objects toward each other. But Newton was wrong, and Einstein proved it over a century ago with a discovery so radical that most people still don't understand its implications. Einstein showed that gravity isn't a force pulling you down. Gravity is the shape of reality itself. To understand what's really happening when you feel pulled by gravity, you need to understand that space and time aren't separate. Fixed backgrounds where things happen. Space and time are dynamic, flexible, curved by the presence of mass and energy. Imagine you're walking across a perfectly flat surface, moving in a straight line. Now imagine that surface starts to curve downward ahead of you. If you keep walking straight, you'll naturally follow the curve of the surface. You're not being pulled by any force. You're simply following the geometry of the space you're moving through. This is exactly what's happening with gravity. The Earth's mass curves the fabric of space-time around it. When you move through this curved space-time, you naturally follow the curvature. What you experience as falling or being pulled down is actually you following the straightest possible path through curved space-time. You're not being pulled anywhere. You're moving in a straight line through space that has been bent by the Earth's mass. This is why Einstein called his theory general relativity rather than a theory of gravity. He realized that gravity isn't a separate force, but a manifestation of the geometry of space-time itself. But this creates a profound conceptual problem. If gravity isn't pulling you down, why aren't you floating? Why do you feel pressed against the ground? Why does it require effort to jump or climb stairs? The answer reveals something even more startling about your relationship to space and time. You're not being pulled down by gravity, you're being pushed up by the ground. Right now, as you sit or stand, the electromagnetic forces in the surface beneath you are pushing against your body, preventing you from following your natural path through curved space-time. The ground is accelerating you upward, away from the path you would naturally follow in the gravitational field. This is the opposite of what you think is happening. You think gravity is pulling you down and the ground is passively resisting. But actually, you're trying to follow a natural path through curved space-time, and the ground is actively pushing you away from that path. The force you feel isn't gravity pulling you down. It's the electromagnetic repulsion of atoms in the ground pushing you up, away from the path you would naturally take through the curved geometry of space-time. When you stand on the ground, you're being accelerated upward by electromagnetic forces. This upward acceleration is what you experience as weight, as the sensation of being pulled down by gravity. This is why Einstein's principle of equivalence is so profound. He realized that the sensation of being in a gravitational field is identical to the sensation of being accelerated. There's no way to tell the difference between being pulled by gravity and being pushed by acceleration. But the deeper truth is that when you're standing still in a gravitational field, you're being accelerated. The ground is accelerating you upward, away from the natural path you would follow through curved space-time. When you jump or fall, you're not being pulled down by gravity. You're finally free to follow your natural path through the geometry of space-time. Falling feels weightless because it is the natural, unaccelerated motion through curved space and time. The astronauts on the International Space Station aren't experiencing zero gravity because they're far from Earth. They're in free fall, following their natural path through Earth's curved space-time without any surface pushing them away from that path. They feel weightless because they're not being accelerated away from their natural motion. This completely reverses our intuitive understanding of motion and force. What feels like natural rest, standing or sitting still, is actually a state of constant acceleration. What feels like falling, which seems like motion under the influence of a force, is actually the natural, unaccelerated state of motion through space-time. You spend most of your life being accelerated upward by electromagnetic forces, preventing you from following your natural path through the curved geometry of reality. But this raises an even more profound question. If gravity is just the curvature of space-time, and if mass and energy curve space-time, what exactly is space-time? What kind of thing can be curved by the presence of matter? Einstein's general relativity describes how space-time curves in the presence of mass and energy, but it doesn't explain what space-time actually is. It treats space-time as a mathematical structure, a four-dimensional manifold that can be curved and twisted, but the physical nature of this manifold remains mysterious. Some theories suggest that space-time itself might be emergent, arising from more fundamental processes at the quantum level. Loop quantum gravity proposes that space and time are made of discrete, quantum mechanical units that create the illusion of smooth curvature at larger scales. String theory suggests that space-time might emerge from the interactions of vibrating strings in higher dimensional spaces. The familiar three dimensions of space and one dimension of time might be projections or shadows of more complex structures in higher dimensions. If space-time is emergent rather than fundamental, then gravity as the curvature of space-time would also be emergent. The force you think is pulling you down would be a large-scale manifestation of quantum mechanical processes operating at scales far too small to detect directly. But even within Einstein's classical description, the implications of gravity as space-time curvature are startling. It means that what you experience as the solid, substantial Earth pulling you with its gravitational force is actually a region of curved space-time geometry. The Earth isn't reaching out with invisible forces to grab you. The Earth's mass creates a depression in the fabric of space-time, and you naturally roll toward the center of that depression when you're not being pushed away by other forces. This has implications for how we understand mass, energy, and the relationship between matter and space. In Newton's view, mass was a property of objects that determined how strongly they would attract other objects gravitationally. In Einstein's view, mass is a source of space-time curvature. But the relationship between mass and space-time curvature is more complex than simple cause and effect. Mass curves space-time, but curved space-time also affects the behavior of mass and energy. The geometry of space-time tells matter how to move, and matter tells space-time how to curve. This creates a dynamic, self-reinforcing relationship between matter and the geometry of reality itself. The universe isn't a collection of objects moving through empty space under the influence of forces. The universe is a dynamic system where matter and the geometry of space-time continuously influence each other. You're not a separate object being acted upon by external forces. You're a temporary pattern of mass and energy participating in the ongoing geometric dance that constitutes reality. But if gravity is space-time curvature rather than a force, this raises questions about the other fundamental forces. Are electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force also geometric properties of space-time, or are they genuinely different types of phenomena? Attempts to unify all the fundamental forces with gravity by treating them as different aspects of space-time geometry have been partially successful but remain incomplete. Electromagnetism can be understood geometrically through gauge theories that treat electromagnetic fields as curvature in abstract mathematical spaces. The strong and weak nuclear forces can also be described geometrically, but unifying these geometric descriptions with the geometry of space-time itself has proved extraordinarily difficult. This is the challenge of quantum gravity, understanding how the quantum mechanical nature of matter and energy relates to the geometric nature of space-time. Some theories propose that all forces, including gravity, emerge from more fundamental quantum mechanical processes. Instead of space-time curvature being primary, quantum entanglement, information processing, or other quantum phenomena might be the source of both space-time geometry and all the forces. If this is correct, then neither gravity as a pulling force nor gravity as space-time curvature would be the complete picture. Gravity might be an emergent phenomenon arising from quantum mechanical processes that also give rise to space, time, matter, and energy. But even if gravity ultimately emerges from more fundamental quantum processes, Einstein's insight about gravity as geometry rather than force remains profound. It reveals that what we experience as the familiar, common-sense world of objects being pulled by forces is actually a very limited and misleading representation of what's actually happening. The sensation of being pulled down by gravity is your nervous system's interpretation of being accelerated upward by electromagnetic forces, preventing you from following your natural path through curved space-time geometry. This has practical implications for space travel and our understanding of acceleration and weightlessness. When a rocket accelerates away from Earth, the astronauts feel pressed back into their seats not because gravity is pulling them down, but because the rocket is pushing them away from their natural path through space-time. When the rocket engines shut off and the spacecraft goes into orbit, the astronauts feel weightless not because gravity has stopped working, but because they're finally free to follow their natural path through the curved space-time around Earth without being pushed away from that path by electromagnetic forces. Understanding gravity as geometry rather than force also provides insight into some of the strange predictions of general relativity. Time dilation, where time passes more slowly in stronger gravitational fields, makes sense if gravity is space-time curvature rather than a force. In regions of curved space-time, the geometry affects not just the paths that objects follow through space, but also the rate at which they move through time. Strong gravitational fields don't slow down time by exerting some mysterious force on clocks. They create space-time geometry where the dimension of time is more curved, leading to slower passage of time relative to regions with less curvature. Gravitational lensing, where massive objects bend the path of light, also makes sense geometrically. Light isn't being deflected by a gravitational force. Light is following straight paths through curved space-time, and these straight paths appear curved when viewed from our perspective in less curved regions. Black holes, perhaps the most extreme gravitational phenomena, are regions where space-time curvature becomes so extreme that the natural paths through space-time lead inevitably toward the center. Objects don't get sucked into black holes by an irresistible gravitational force. They follow the available paths through space-time geometry, and in the vicinity of a black hole, all paths lead inward. But understanding gravity as space-time curvature also reveals something profound about the nature of physical reality itself. If the most familiar and constant physical experience, the sensation of being pulled by gravity, is actually a misinterpretation of geometric effects, then how many other aspects of physical reality might be fundamentally different from how they appear? The solidity of matter, the flow of time, the separateness of objects, the force-like nature of interactions might all be limited representations of more complex geometric or quantum mechanical realities. Your intuitive understanding of living in a world of solid objects interacting through forces in empty space might be as fundamentally mistaken as the intuitive understanding of gravity as a pulling force. Einstein's insight about gravity was just the beginning of a much more radical revision of physical reality. If gravity isn't what it seems, then perhaps nothing is what it seems. But this doesn't make physical reality less real or less meaningful. It makes it more subtle, more interconnected, and more dependent on geometric and quantum mechanical principles that operate far below the level of everyday experience. You're not being pulled down by gravity. You're being accelerated upward by electromagnetic forces, preventing you from following your natural path through the curved geometry of space-time created by the Earth's mass. This isn't just a technical correction to how gravity works. It's a fundamental revision of what it means to exist in a physical universe. You're not a separate object being acted upon by external forces. You're a temporary pattern participating in the geometric structure of reality itself. Gravity doesn't pull you down because gravity isn't a force at all. Gravity is the shape of existence, and you're moving through that shape in ways that your nervous system interprets as being pulled by invisible forces. Understanding this changes everything about what it means to be a physical being in a geometric universe where matter, energy, space, and time are all aspects of a single dynamic, interconnected reality. The next time you feel the familiar sensation of gravity pulling you toward the ground, remember that you're actually experiencing the electromagnetic forces of the Earth's surface pushing you away from your natural path through curved space-time. You're not falling toward the Earth. The Earth is accelerating you away from the natural motion you would have in the absence of surfaces to push against. Gravity doesn't pull you down. Gravity is the curved stage on which the dance of existence unfolds, and you're being pushed away from your natural dance steps by the forces that create the illusion of solid ground beneath your feet. But this geometric understanding of gravity reveals even more profound mysteries about the nature of reality itself. If space-time can be curved by mass and energy, and if this curvature is what we experience as gravity, then space and time are not the fixed, absolute backdrop that Newton imagined. Space and time are dynamic, flexible, responsive to the presence of matter and energy. They can be stretched, compressed, twisted, and warped. They can ripple like waves when massive objects accelerate, creating gravitational waves that carry energy across the universe. This means that the arena in which all physical events take place is itself a participant in those events. Space and time don't just contain reality. They are shaped by reality and help determine what kinds of realities are possible. Your presence right now is slightly curving the space-time around you. Your mass, tiny as it is compared to planets and stars, creates its own geometric effects in the fabric of existence. You're not just moving through space-time. You're participating in creating the geometric structure of space-time itself. This participation in cosmic geometry happens at every scale. Every atom in your body contributes to the space-time curvature that creates what you experience as your gravitational field. Every movement you make sends tiny ripples through the geometric structure of reality. When you jump, you're not just overcoming a gravitational force pulling you down. You're temporarily following a ballistic trajectory through curved space-time until the electromagnetic forces of the ground catch you again and resume accelerating you away from your natural geometric path. When you walk, you're not just pushing against the friction of solid surfaces. You're using electromagnetic forces to redirect your path through curved space-time, creating a controlled sequence of accelerations that move you in the direction you choose while keeping you pushed away from your natural gravitational trajectory. Every physical action you take involves complex interactions between the electromagnetic forces that create the illusion of solid surfaces and the geometric structure of space-time that determines what natural motion would be in the absence of those surfaces. But perhaps the most mind-bending implication of gravity as space-time curvature concerns the nature of time itself. In Einstein's relativity, space and time are unified into a single four-dimensional structure called space-time. This means that gravity doesn't just affect motion through space, it affects motion through time. The closer you are to a massive object like Earth, the more curved space-time becomes, and the more slowly time passes relative to regions farther away. This isn't a metaphor or an approximation. It's a measurable, practical effect that has to be accounted for in GPS satellites and other precise timing systems. Right now, because you're in Earth's gravitational field, time is passing more slowly for you than it would if you were far away from any massive objects. Your head, being slightly farther from Earth's center than your feet, experiences time passing slightly faster than your feet do. This temporal aspect of gravity means that what you experience as the present moment is actually different depending on your location in gravitational fields. There's no universal now that applies everywhere in the universe. Your now is determined by your position in the geometric structure of curved spacetime. If gravity were simply a force pulling you down, none of these temporal effects would make sense. But if gravity is spacetime curvature, then the fact that massive objects affect both your motion through space and your motion through time becomes a natural consequence of living in a four-dimensional geometric reality. This temporal dimension of gravity also explains why it's impossible to shield against gravitational effects the way you can shield against electromagnetic forces. You can block electromagnetic radiation with conducting materials, but you can't block space-time curvature because space-time curvature is the geometric structure in which all materials exist. There's no such thing as gravitational shielding because gravity isn't a force that travels through space from one object to another. Gravity is the shape of the space through which everything, including potential shielding materials, must move. This is why Einstein called general relativity a theory of gravitation rather than a theory of gravity. He was describing the geometric structure of reality itself. Gravity doesn't pull you down. Gravity is the curvature of space-time, and you're being pushed away from your natural path through that curvature.